Hello, and welcome back to 50 States, 50 Murders, the podcast taking you, the listener, on an auditory road trip across all 50 states while discussing 50 different murders. Thank you all for tuning into Season 2, Episode 23.
This week we're heading to Cheshire, Connecticut to look into the infamous Cheshire Murders.
This state was recommended to us by our very own co-host, Sarah. Welcome back, Sarah. Thank you for joining the team, and you're back for episode 2. So last week must have went well enough to make your return.
Happy to be here.
Back for the second episode, and you wanted to recommend Connecticut and the Cheshire Murders. Before we get too deep into the case, we don't want to give too much away just yet, but I wanted to kind of find out what led to this as your suggestion.
I did. About a year ago, I think it was, I did hear this on a podcast, and I know there's recently been a documentary that was released. Originally, when I first heard the case, it kind of reminded me of the opening scene of Law Abiding Citizen,
okay,
which is one of my favorite movies. So yeah, it just piqued my interest, and I wanted to kind of throw it out there because I know Connecticut hasn't been done yet. So
has not been done yet. This is going to be our first time in Connecticut, fictitiously.
Yeah.
I have not been there in real life, and who knows, maybe someday I'll make it there. We will kick this episode off by discussing the state. It's a travel podcast, so let's learn a little bit about Connecticut. I myself am not very familiar. Again, never been there. This one, a little bit harder. One thing I learned doing this with Dakota is some states make it extremely easy to find facts, little interesting tidbits, find things to do, places to see. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to jump ahead here and let you know this was a little bit more of a difficult one for me. I'm going to do my best to sell this state for you as I did with Dakota. I'm going to foreshadow this one a little bit. I have a feeling that this state may potentially wind up on the lower tier of our state rankings, but I could be wrong. Let's kind of see how this goes and see where it lands. Connecticut. The state nickname is the Constitution State. And last week we covered Montana, which was the 4th largest state in America. This week we are in Connecticut, which is the 3rd smallest state, just ahead of Rhode Island and Delaware. With a total of 4,842 square miles, you could actually take 30 Connecticut's and fit them all into one state of Montana. That just kind of gives you an idea of how different these two states are going to be. And even though Connecticut is 30 times smaller than Montana, in terms of population, Connecticut holds 3 times as many people, with just a little over 3 million people. So we have a state that's 30 times smaller, but 3 times as many people. Totally different atmosphere in regards to these two states. And also Connecticut, one thing they do rank at the top, they are number 1 in all 50 states regarding state income per capita at just a little over 80,000. So it's more of a hoity-toity state that we have here. It's a little bit more uppity, I guess you could say. Fun facts about Connecticut. Connecticut is the first state to initiate an automobile law. So if you've ever been pulled over for exceeding the speed limit, you can thank Connecticut for putting that in place. In 1901, they set the first ever speed limit at a whopping 12 miles per hour.
Wow.
Kind of crazy because pretty sure you could set a treadmill for 12 miles per hour. That's not that fast. 1901, if you were going over 12 miles per hour, you could potentially get a speeding ticket in the state of Connecticut. Connecticut is home to USA's oldest newspaper that's still being published, which we'll make reference to this in our own case, and that's the Hartford Courant. Started in 1764, still running to this day. Few strange laws in Connecticut. We dropped a few from Montana. I saw a couple that I thought were interesting. For beauticians and stylists, if you are operating the state of Connecticut. It is illegal to hum, sing, or whistle while you are working. PDA. No one really likes PDA. But in the state of Connecticut, it's illegal for two people who are married to kiss in public on Sundays.
On Sundays.
If you want to do it on Saturday, that's fine. Just don't do it on Sunday. A big deal breaker for my wife and I. In the city of Guilford, Connecticut, come Christmas time, only white lights may be displayed during the holiday season.
Yikes.
So if you are someone like my wife who loves colored lights, probably aren't going to like Guilford, Connecticut. But me, myself, I prefer white lights only. I just think it looks better. I don't know. What are you? Are you a white light, colored lights? What are you?
It seems a little hoity-toity, I guess.
Yeah,
which
right.
fits
I
the
think
state.
it fits the narrative for sure.
I like the look of all white better, but when I feel like for kids and everything, it's really excited to see all the different colors light up on the Christmas tree. So,
all right, we are we're asking for some patience here. We're just getting this back up and running. We're a little late on our TikTok for Montana. We'll get that up. But we also have the Connecticut state flag. That'll be included in our Connecticut TikTok. I mean, Montana's flag I thought was pretty cool. This one, I don't know. I'm not a fan. I mean, what are you thinking here? We got like a blue square, and I guess I would say it looks like a vineyard.
Not my favorite looking aesthetically, but...
Well, we'll throw it on the TikTok regardless. I mean, it's, we always throw the state flags on there. Murder per capita. Connecticut is coming in at 36th out of all 50 states for murder per capita. And they average 3.8 murders per 100,000 people. So, relatively safer state, if you're talking about average. Geographically speaking, last week we were out west in Montana. This week we are heading to the northeastern region. Connecticut sits on the east coast. Below Connecticut is the Atlantic Ocean. Above Connecticut sits Massachusetts. To the right is Rhode Island, and to the left is New York. You have to go through Connecticut if you want to get to Boston from New York, or vice versa. So while it's not a very visited state, it is pretty frequently traveled through. And it's a pretty quick state to get through. It's here and gone before you realize it because it is so small. That's some interesting facts about Connecticut. Pretty exciting. Now let's talk about some top places to see. First up, we just have the city of Mystic, Connecticut. Threw a couple photos in there for you. It's the charming seaside village, one of the most iconic destinations in the state, thanks to an array of activities, eateries, and historic landmarks, such as the Mystic River Bascule Bridge, built in 1922. Some of the town's top attractions include the Mystic Seaport Museum, where visitors can explore the country's largest collection of historic ships, from tugboats to schooners, as well as the iconic Mystic Aquarium. And shout out to TripAdvisor, as I pulled that straight from TripAdvisor, if you couldn't tell the way I read that. It's just a little seaside town. You're going to get your seaside vibes. There's a pretty cool museum. I did see a lot of different articles about the aquarium. If it was a place where you were going to visit with your little one, that could be an interesting spot to check out.
Do you like aquariums?
I do. Personally, I enjoy aquariums.
Yeah.
I've been to a few. I went to Atlanta, and we got to go to the Atlanta Aquarium. That's by far best aquarium I've ever been to. I can't say it. I've been to a lot, so that's not saying much. Who knows? Maybe Mystic Aquarium tops Atlanta. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. We just visited the Charlotte, North Carolina aquarium, and it was really nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're cool. They did mention that there are, you have penguins and you have beluga whales at this aquarium. And also, for what it's worth, Mystic, Connecticut is one of the top places in the northeastern region to go whale watching.
Okay, well, fun fact about me, I am terrified of whales.
Yes.
So I don't know if you're really selling it with that point, but I do love penguins.
Okay.
Whales have always just terrified me. I think just how big they are, and I don't know.
I see whales are like top of my bucket list for things I really want to see in my life, just because of how, I don't know, just how big they are, and it's not something you can see in the zoo. You gotta really...
But you can in the aquarium.
See them in the wild. Some of them you can. You could see a beluga whale, a little bit of a smaller scaled whale. So yeah, I mean, if you ever make it to Connecticut, make sure that you visit the town of Mystic, because there's lots to do and plenty to see. All right, next up I have the Gillette Castle State Park. I thought this one looked pretty unique. Located in East Haddam, Connecticut. It's a scenic state park with a 24-room castle mansion that you can tour and walk through. There is a 1,000-foot tower that you can go up to. Gives you a 360 overlook of the entire park. I mean, this is a legit castle, though. I can't really think of a time where I've ever been inside of a castle, personally. I'd say that'd be pretty awesome. Besides that, I mean, you just have the overlook of the state park itself. I don't know. What do you think? A castle? Is that something you'd want to check out?
I mean, sure. It definitely would be interesting. I really like the state parks. You know, they usually have like a lodge or something. So obviously a castle seems like a little bit of an upgrade. Yeah. But I think it'd be really cool to see.
So for my third one here, this is more, I'm trying to sell my co-host here. So I really, this was actually the number 6 place for TripAdvisor, state of Connecticut. And that's going to be our Foxwoods Resort Casino. It's located in Massantucket, Connecticut. And here you have a casino with exciting games, fine dining, entertainment, and on top of all that, 5-star service. So you can gamble, you can go back to your room. That's always a big selling point for me personally. Yeah. Foxwoods Casino is the largest resort of its kind in the Northeast region. I thought that was a little bit more up your alley, so I wanted to include it. Unfortunately, TripAdvisor, they kind of like threw the most depressing photo of the place.
It does look a little bit dated, but
yeah, it's the photo itself is not really a selling point for me. Did have like a lot of 5-star reviews, and don't forget 5-star service.
Yeah.
Foxwoods Resort Casino. If you ever make it to Connecticut, I think that would be something where maybe not for the kiddos.
Right.
It might be adults only. But those are the 3 things that I came up with. And I'm excited to come back around the horn and see where you throw Connecticut.
Hopefully nobody calls 1-800-GAMBLING Anonymous on me by the end of these 2 podcasts.
Now that we learned a little bit about the small state of Connecticut, as well as some places to check out while visiting, let's go over 3 notorious murderers from the state of Connecticut.
First up, we have Adam Lanza, also known as a Sandy Hook school shooter. December 14th, 2012, 20-year-old Adam Lanza started the morning by killing his mother at home in Newtown, Connecticut, about 5 miles from Sandy Hook Elementary. Lanza then drove to the elementary school where he would open fire. His motive is still unknown. He killed 20 students, 6 teachers, for 26 in all, and 28 if you count himself and his mother. This incident is the deadliest mass shooting in the state of Connecticut, as well as the deadliest elementary school shooting in America.
Okay, so we have the Sandy Hook school shooter. I feel like this one we all can remember. It wasn't that long ago, 2012, like you said. And Dakota and I, we covered in the state of Connecticut or state of Colorado, we had the Columbine shooting. I feel like that's the most notorious school shooting because it's probably the first of our kind that was like covered by national media. But this one, I feel like we could all agree different. It's probably the saddest. There's not like a value of age, but it's little kids, kindergartners, first graders. It's just a totally different feeling. So this one will always have an impact in American murder history. And Adam Lanza, when you look at his mugshot, it just looks like a school shooter.
Definitely terrifying to see his eyes.
Yeah, he looks like the school book school shooter. So Adam Lanza first up for the state of Connecticut. Who do we got next?
Next, we have Michael Bruce Ross, also known as the Roadside Killer, with a body count of 8. Michael Bruce Ross was born on July 26, 1959. An infamous killer in Connecticut, Ross claimed the lives of 8 women between 1981 to 1984. Ross began targeting and killing young women in 1981. He would track these women while they were walking home alone, usually on empty roadways, or he would search for lone hitchhikers. This led to his nickname, the Roadside Killer. Because of this, Ross became the first person to be executed since 1960 and was the last person the state put to death before the death penalty was repealed.
All right, so second up we have the Roadside Killer. I feel like that's something that you really don't hear about as much anymore in modern day is hitchhikers catching a ride. We have Uber now. You get a ride on Lyft.
I don't care if it's the saddest looking person on the side of the road. I'm not picking anybody up.
No, I agree. If I see you walking and you got your thumb out, I do apologize, but I'm going to politely pass on by. But all right, so we got Adam Lanza. We have the Roadside Killer. Lastly, for our notorious Connecticut killers, who do we got?
We have William Devin Howell, also known as the Sick Ripper, with a body count of 7. William Devin Howell was born on February 11th, 1970, and was convicted of killing 7 women in Connecticut. Howell is easily one of the state's most prolific killers, murdering and dismembering his victims, as well as videotaping himself raping them. He's also one of the most memorable, as his killing spree took place only 19 years ago. All of Howell's victims were kidnapped and killed in 2003, according to state police. Howell was first suspected of the murder of Nilsa Arizmendi, a 33-year-old sex worker, in April of 2004. He spent months denying his involvement with the murder, despite police having found Arizmendi's blood in the back of Howell's van. Howell was sentenced to 15 years in prison for manslaughter because of this, despite police not having found the body. Just weeks after his conviction, however, the case took a monumental turn. A hunter accidentally stumbled onto a graveyard behind the West Farms shopping mall in West Hartford. 3 bodies were found belonging to 55-year-old Diane Cusack, 23-year-old Joyveline Martinez, and 40-year-old Mary Jane Menard. On November 17, 2017, Howell was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences after pleading guilty. To this day, he remains in prison at the Cheshire Correctional Institution.
Okay, so there are our 3 infamous murderers in the small state of Connecticut. Lastly, we have William Devin Howell, who is locked up in the Cheshire Correctional Institution, which I feel like is a nice little transition for our own personal murder case of the week, which is the case of the Cheshire Murders. The Petit family, who we will be talking about, was a family of 4 who lived in Cheshire, Connecticut. Husband and wife, Bill and Jennifer Petit. Jennifer was a nurse as well as a co-director of the health center at Cheshire Academy. In 1985, while working at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, she was a new oncology nurse. There she met third-year medical student at the time, Bill Petit. Jennifer and Bill married that same year of 1985. Bill was an endocrinologist in Plainville as well as the medical director for the Joslin Diabetes Center at Connecticut's Central Hospital. They were mother and father to their 2 daughters, 17-year-old Haley and 11-year-old Michaela.
Haley had just graduated from high school. She played varsity cross country, basketball, and crew. Academically, she was a high honor roll student. She was elected to the senior leadership position, as she also was a school award winner for exceptional community service. Haley was active in fundraising for multiple sclerosis research. This was an avenue that hit home, as her mother, Jennifer, was recently diagnosed with MS. She captained a walk MS team named Haley's Hope. Haley's next plans were to attend Dartmouth College to study medicine. Michaela, the youngest of the siblings, attended Chase Collegiate School. One of her biggest hobbies that she really enjoyed was cooking, which she often did for her family. Michaela's plans were that once her older sister Haley left for school, she would take over Haley's Hope and rename it Michaela's Miracle.
This week's case takes us back 17 years. The morning of Monday, July 23rd, 2007. A home intrusion where 2 perpetrators broke into the Petit family's home, murdering 3 of the 4 Petits, and going down in American murder history as the Cheshire Murders. Now, this case is going to be slightly different, as there was not a big mystery or manhunt as to who the killers of this heinous crime really were. Some of the more notorious cases that gain mystique, I think it comes from everyone wanting to know who done it. Some who are caught and are a bit nifty get away with it for some years. A lot of murderers, as Dakota likes to classify them, as dumbasses who were not as smart, maybe not as bright. Prime example would be last week's case of our Montana murderer, Diego Hernandez.
For this week's case of the Cheshire Murders, why do we not have a murder mystery detectives reviewing clues and late nights looking at evidence to get to the bottom of who this week's killer could be? This is because our murderers were caught red-handed in the act. With this case being a bit different than some, given the killers were caught red-handed, before we get to the details of the case, let's learn a bit about the perpetrators who were responsible for what the Hartford Courant deemed possibly the most widely publicized crime in the state's history.
So our first perpetrator up, we have Stephen Hayes. Stephen was born May 30th, 1963, and he would be 44 at the time of this murder. Stephen had a history of crime prior to being locked away for today's case. His past goes all the way back to when he was just 16 years old. In 1980, he was convicted for an offense as an adult. He was paroled 2 years later in 1982, but violated his parole just 7 weeks later. In between his first arrest and his last arrest for the Cheshire Murders, Hayes was arrested close to 30 times, just to help give an idea for who this person really was. The last crime he committed prior to today's murder was in 2004. Hayes took a rock and smashed a car window so that he could steal a woman's purse. He was paroled 2 years later in 2006, where he was sent to Silliman Halfway House. This specific crime and parole is important because at the Silliman Halfway House is where he met Joshua Komarczewski. Joshua would go on to become a partner in crime for today's murder case.
Joshua was born August 10th, 1980, making him 26 at the time of the murder. Joshua was born to a 16-year-old who was not quite ready to be a mom, and he was given up for adoption and adopted by the Komarczewski family. Joshua, like his partner Stephen, was not squeaky clean either. He was accused of sexual assault by his sister in the early 1990s. Joshua essentially made his living by breaking into homes. His first burglary was when he was 14 years old. In 2002, he was arrested 18 times for breaking into homes. He could remember every detail to every home invasion. He said his favorite thing to do would be to go into people's rooms when they were sleeping and just listen to them breathe. He basically got a high from invading homes and people's security. Of those 18 arrests in 2002, he was sentenced to 9 years of prison and 6 years of special parole. Joshua stayed at the Silliman Halfway House, bringing Joshua and Stephen closer together.
For this week's case, we have two pretty bad dudes committing these crimes. Neither one squeaky clean, like we said. Stephen Hayes, who was arrested 30 times nearly, and then we have Joshua, who, pretty creepy, I think we could all agree, who would just get off on invading homes and not hurting you, but more so just watching you breathe and just knowing that he could if he wanted to. I think there's something a little bit extra creepy to that. It almost makes you wonder, have I ever been asleep at night and someone was in my home?
Let's hope not.
Yeah, I hope not, but I mean, it's just, that's a pretty creepy story from Joshua, one of our two perpetrators for today's case. While the murder took place on Monday, July 23rd, this story will take us back one day prior, Sunday, July 22nd. When discussing the Petits' youngest daughter, Michaela, it was mentioned that she enjoyed cooking for her family. Sunday evening, Michaela and her mother went to the local grocery store near their home where she was picking up food that she was going to make for dinner that night. Unfortunately, this set off events that led to them being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The grocery store that they went to that Sunday evening, Joshua also happened to be at, and he took notice to the mother and daughter. He would follow them home from the store that same night.
Shortly afterwards, Stephen sent a text message to Joshua that read, "I'm chomping at the bit to get started. Need a margarita soon." Stephen then texted, "We still on?" Joshua replied, "Yes." Stephen's next text asked, "Soon?" To which Joshua replied, I'm putting the kid to bed. Hold your horses. Joshua replied, dude, the horses want to get loose. LOL.
Yeah, so something that just jumped out at me while reviewing this case, watching a documentary, reading up some information. I guess sometimes I take for granted just being a dude, just going out in public. What I mean by that is maybe it's 10 p.m. at night and I just want to walk my dogs. I really wouldn't think twice about it. Maybe it's 11 p.m. and I need batteries from Walmart and I'm just going to go do it. I'm not really thinking twice. I mean, given your scenario, given where you're at, I mean, sure, I might have a head on a swivel a tiny bit, but for the most part, I really don't think twice when I go out. But for someone who has a wife, 2 sisters, nieces, I don't want any of them going out at, nighttime. Now, this just so happened to happen at a really nice community during the day.
At the grocery store.
So I guess I kind of wanted to get your perspective on this, being a woman, being a mother to a younger daughter. When you go out in public, is that something that you're aware of? Do you have that head on a swivel mentality? Or especially when you're with your daughter, does that heighten the awareness?
Yeah, definitely. Especially, now becoming a mom, every sense is heightened.
Sure.
And, I am constantly paranoid every time, not in a bad way, but my head is always looking around to make sure my back is not towards anything for too long when I have my daughter. But you don't think about going to the grocery store at a normal time at night, before dinner, that, there's going to be predators just lurking. I will say, just being a woman, I've always been a little more cautious. I religiously follow all of my friends and family's locations, as you know.
Sure.
Just to make sure everybody's made it home okay and nobody's phone is pinging somewhere it shouldn't be. So it's, being a woman is definitely different, and being a mom, you really always have to be paying attention.
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you don't want to live your life in fear, but when you hear stories like this, a really nice community, we mentioned at the top of the show, Connecticut ranks #1 in wealth. So, you think that you're in a safe community, and it just goes to show you that it could happen anywhere. So, always good to just have your head on a swivel, regardless of time or place. Sometimes I think I take for granted being a guy and just not really having to worry about that so much. So I definitely appreciate your perspective on that.
Also, they've, the state of Connecticut never has seen something like this. So,
right.
Now that we're reviewing cases and, other people, this was publicized and everything, I think that makes other people in other states and even in wealthy neighborhoods kind of second guess if they're really truly safe were they going to the grocery store.
True. So back to Joshua, he had a history of sexual assault that we mentioned earlier. Now, in a documentary I watched regarding this case, they had interviewed a girl who was a former girlfriend of his, and she was much younger and still in high school. He had talked to her father about getting his blessing and that he was interested in marrying his daughter. His father, of course, did not approve of the blessing, and then he accused him of being a child predator, which in return he said, "I'm sorry you feel that way." And that was just something that kind of stood out to me because, if that's an accusation that's ever thrown my way, last thing I'm going to ever do is say, "Oh, I'm sorry you feel that way."
He didn't say he's not.
Yeah,
he didn't say no.
No,
that's not me.
You're extremely wrong on that.
You're wrong. You're mistaken.
Sorry you feel that way.
Sorry you feel that way and you have that gut reaction.
Just a crazy rebuttal to an accusation such as that.
Absolutely.
So the reason I bring the story up, however, it was mentioned by the girlfriend that when she looked at Michaela, she thought that Michaela actually resembled her a bit. So while there's not necessarily a motive to this case, it is thought that upon seeing Michaela at the grocery store that night, there was an attraction that influenced the home invasion.
Both Stephen and Joshua said after the fact that plans initially went south almost immediately. The plan was to invade the home later in the night. The idea was to leave the family bound, but they did not initially plan to harm them. However, when they got to the home earlier in the day and found Bill Petit asleep on the couch, they decided to go for it earlier than expected, with the father sleeping. They entered the basement through an unlocked door. Conveniently, there happened to be a baseball bat leaning against the stairs that was used to strike Bill 4 to 5 times. Bill was then bound by his ankles and wrists with both plastic zip ties and rope. They then bound the mother and 2 children in the rooms, zip tying them to all the bedposts and putting pillowcases over their heads.
So I think that just continues to really drive home like how creepy this case is, because you have a doctor, a nurse, 2 kids who are influenced to be doctors in the future, wealthy community, doors unlocked. You don't think twice about locking your door behind you. Why would you in the community that you're in? And yeah, these 2 guys just easily helped themselves right into the house. Conveniently, a baseball bat right there to take out Bill. Yeah, just a scary story from all around. So the next plan was to ransack the residence for all the cash they could find. However, they simply were not satisfied with the money they came up with in the home. They continued to push the envelope, and their next move was an odd one. With the girls bound to their bedroom and the father bound to the basement, Stephen and Joshua decided it would be a great idea to force Jennifer into their car and take her to the bank, where she was instructed to withdraw $15,000 from her line of credit. If Dakota were here with us for today's episode, I think he would classify that as a dumbass move. While she was instructed not to tell anyone inside what was happening on the outside, Jennifer, clearly shaken up, was able to communicate to the teller that her family was kidnapped at home and that there were 2 men outside holding them all hostage. The manager of the bank phoned 911 and detailed the situation to the 911 operator while Jennifer was with the teller. The manager relayed to 911 that per Jennifer, the 2 men were, quote, being nice and believed all they wanted was money. The Cheshire Police Department responded to this call by setting up a perimeter without being noticed.
After returning from the bank, this is where the home invasion took a drastic turn. With police outside and Bill still downstairs beaten and bound, Joshua sexually assaulted 11-year-old Michaela. He confessed to the rape during interrogation, and DNA evidence confirmed this admission. He also recorded the assault on his phone. He later told detectives he was under the impression that she was either 14 or 16. Not that that makes it any better.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I thought she was 14 or 16, not 11.
Terrible.
Okay, yeah, weird admission.
Yeah.
Again, it just kind of goes back to the fact that...
Yeah, he was attracted to a lot younger women, but...
Yeah, no rebuttals, no arguments. Nope. Interesting.
Nope. After this, Stephen was provoked by Joshua to do the same to Jennifer. As Jennifer was assaulted, this is when Bill was able to escape from the basement and rush to the neighbor's house for help. Joshua ran into the room to notify him that Bill had escaped, which is when Stephen then strangled Jennifer, leaving her lifeless body on the ground right in the living room of the family's home. They then doused different parts of the house, as well as Jennifer's body and the daughters upstairs, with gasoline. They lit a fire, setting the house, Jennifer, Michaela, and Haley all ablaze, and then attempted to drive away, unaware of the police perimeter outside.
Sadly, during the house fire, while Jennifer was already dead beforehand, both the girls tragically passed away in the fire due to smoke inhalation. The oldest sister, Haley, did manage to escape her room and make it to the stairs before collapsing. Her body was found at the top of the staircase. Michaela was found in her bedroom, still tied to the bedpost. Joshua and Stephen fled using the Petit Family car. They were immediately spotted and arrested 1 block away after crashing into a police cruiser. This entire ordeal from start to arrest lasted a total of 7 hours. Both men confessed to the murders, each pointing their fingers at the other as far as who was the mastermind behind the plan. It's worth mentioning that Joshua also blamed the father, Bill Petit, calling him a coward and essentially accusing him of not doing more, stating that he could have saved his family if he really wanted to. Thought this was a little crazy because survivor's guilt for Bill had to have been off the charts. You're bound. You feel helpless. There's nothing you could do.
Joshua sounds like, not trying to diagnose him, but he sounds like a classic narcissist.
Yeah, definitely. And you lose your entire family. The thing you probably want the most is to have been murdered as well, to not have to deal with the survivor's guilt. And then the guy that did it almost blames you. For what it's worth, the neighbor in this case, Bill climbed to the neighbor's house for help. And the neighbor who lived next to them forever didn't even recognize who it was. Like, he was beaten so bad that he had no idea who this strange guy was crawling into the house. So just to kind of...
He had no chance, I don't really think, to be up against two guys that are, known criminals to try to save his family. I think that was probably his best bet, was to try to go to get help. It's just unfortunate that the timing...
Yeah, tough all around, sure.
On October 5th, 2010, Stephen Hayes was found guilty of 16 counts relating to the Cheshire Murders. On November 8th, 2010, the jury came back recommending execution. He was held in the Northern Correctional Institution in Somers, Connecticut, which housed the state's death row for men. In 2019, Stephen Hayes stated during an interview that he was transgender and was actually a woman. Stephen Hayes today is now Linda Hayes.
Yeah, that was something that we were looking up before we started recording. And from what we could see, he's still in the men's facility, but as a woman. And for Joshua, he was found guilty on all 17 counts on October 13th, 2011. The jury also recommended the death penalty for him as well. August 16th, 2016, he was transferred to a different prison, and he attempted to kill himself. But unfortunately for him, his attempt failed. He sought a retrial, but this request was denied. In 2019, the Connecticut Supreme Court headed over his case, and they rejected an appeal in a 7-0 decision. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear the retrial after the Connecticut Supreme Court vote. Also, something I thought was interesting, we had mentioned how originally the plan was not to hurt anybody. They were just going to bound them and take their money. But it was determined that it was premeditated because there was video evidence of them stopping at the gas station prior to returning from the bank and getting the gas cans that they then used to set the house on fire. So, yeah, if you weren't planning on
lighting the house on
anyone,
fire,
yeah, why stop and get gasoline? So it definitely was premeditated, regardless of them claiming that they were going to do no harm. And you can kind of tell this wasn't a really well thought out plan. You mentioned how it went south early. They got there, they saw the dad sleeping, and they just decided to go for it. They don't know if they're going to hurt someone or not. They're getting gas. Just a whole mess in this entire ordeal. Thankfully, the jury was able to find both of these guys guilty, and they'll be doing life in prison. There were some criticisms towards the police as well as the 911 operators who handled this call. There was some concerns regarding the fact that police did not intercept the car that Jennifer was in after leaving the bank to go back to the house. There were some concerns that the police maybe did not act fast enough, and they were sitting outside with the perimeter while, the rape and the strangulation and then the setting of fire was all taking place. It's also thought that perhaps 911 operators didn't do a good enough job of expressing the urgency of this matter. But to their defense, Jennifer did make mention that they weren't being mean. They just wanted the money. That's all she thought that they wanted. So I could kind of see both sides of this one. I'm not a police officer, so it's kind of hard to put myself in that situation. But I also can understand if I'm the family. I'd prefer if you got in there and tried to do what you could. I know your mom is a retired 911 operator. Thank you for your service. So I kind of wanted to get your take on this, see what you thought.
Yeah, so, and my sister actually is also a 911 dispatcher now. truly, I do not put any blame on them. I know that when Jennifer was at the bank, at least in all the reports I've read, she put a note there that, they were only seeking the money, and that, but if there were any police involved, she was threatened that they would kill her whole family. So, I mean, I think that they were trying to, just make sure that there wasn't a bunch of cop cars pulling up, and
Sure.
Because, I mean, I guess it would have had the same outcome, but I think, it just wasn't relayed to them the same, because it also came from the bank teller's manager. So, I mean, a game of telephone.
Yep.
But, you stand in a line of 6 people, and by the time it gets to the end, what you actually said is completely different. So I just think it's hard to tell the sense of urgency from a phone call of somebody who dealt with somebody who's actually going through that, I guess. So I don't think, that the 911 dispatchers are to blame, or really the police officers, but I do think that as a family, you want somebody to blame for something like this. I mean, it's a tragic situation all the way around, and I think you need somebody to blame to put the pieces together almost.
The sheriff did express that he was, in fact, happy with the way his team handled this case. And regardless of the controversies and the complaints, there was at never any point where the Cheshire Police Department was ever reviewed for their actions that took place on this day. I always like to try to find some sort of meaning or closing points after each week's case. And I guess for me personally, I kind of already touched on it, but it just goes to show you that regardless of wealth, regardless of your income or where you live, crime may pick other places to hit harder, but it really doesn't.
Crime does not discriminate.
Yeah, it really doesn't discriminate as far as class goes. You could be high class, low class, middle class. I mean, it can happen anywhere to anybody. And I don't want to be someone who lives life in fear. I don't want to be someone who constantly is locking the door, looking over my shoulder. But when you hear stories like this, it's almost like you have to be conscious of all things at all times.
I just think it's tragic. I mean, it was a crazy case. And like I said, I heard it from a different podcast, and I really wanted to kind of take a deeper dive into it. So I appreciate you letting me pick this week's case, and definitely learned a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the suggestion, and I appreciate you coming back for episode 2. Looking forward to episode 3. But before we close out, as always, I like to recap the state we discussed. So places to do, things to see. We discussed some notorious murders as well as the murder case for each week. Sarah, we were in Connecticut this week. The city of Mystic, Connecticut, where you could do some whale watching. You sent me a pretty interesting video.
I say you got my TikTok, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody saw the TikTok of the whale swallowing the kayaker, but I sent that to AJ and let him know one of the reasons why my ranking was probably not going to be so high this week.
Yeah, so you got some whale watching. We have Gillette Castle State Park, where you can check out a castle, check out the state park. Everyone loves a good state park. And then we have Foxwoods Resort Casino. I know that's going to be a hot spot for Sarah. She's got to check out if she ever goes to Connecticut. So with all those things being said, let's throw it back over to you. State of Connecticut. In a list of 1 to 49 as far as desirable states to visit, where would you put the state of Connecticut?
Unfortunately, Connecticut is still going to rank pretty low. I'm going to give it a 46.
Oh, 46. Okay. All right.
Sorry.
All right. Well, as we begin our departure from the state of Connecticut, in conclusion of episode 23 of 50 States, 50 Murders, we want to continue to thank you, the listener, for tuning in each and every week as we continue covering a new state as well as a murder case that took place there.
If you have not already, please be sure to follow and subscribe. We are on Spotify, TikTok, and now YouTube. Be sure to tune in next week for episode 24, where we take you to Alaska. you.